Revolution fails and new prison cells. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is January 21st, 2021. So 121, 2021. That's a lot of 21s. This would be a good day to turn 21. Anyway, so on this date in history in 2009, 12 years ago, Sully Sullenberger landed on the Hudson River and saved the lives of hundreds of people whenever he crashed into a flock of birds violently. Unlike me, whenever I hit birds, I don't go off the road, so maybe I should be the pilot, because then the story would be, pilot avoids birds. Or pilot crashes into birds and doesn't kill people on the plane. News at 11. The 1830 to 1831 revolutions popped up all over Europe. France really tries to reestablish the status quo following the French Revolution. They try and restore the power of the Catholic clergy and the aristocrats. Even though most of them had been killed along with their children, they still had some people that they championed into those positions. They're also going to censor the press as one of the things that really helped trigger the French Revolution. And they end up putting one of the king's relatives on the throne, and that's King Louis Philippe, who is a very, very overweight man. One point in the paper, before, when they're still fighting to reestablish censorship, they told you the way to draw Louis Philippe was to start by drawing a pear, and then you put on eyes, nose, and a mouth on it, but basically they drew the shape of his head into a pear. So he was a bourgeois king, and he would follow the Constitution of 1814, the one that was put in place after Napoleon was overthrown. Also during this time, Belgium's going to declare independence after France's Revolution. And the great powers are going to keep Belgium neutral through whatever happens in the future. Now, Poland is going to be a much different story than in France. The Polish are actually going to revolt against Russia. But they're no match for Russia, as they never are. And the rebellion is brutally crushed by Tsar Nicholas I. By the way, his grandson, or great-grandson, will be the last Tsar of Russia, so their family's going to get theirs. At this point, all that was remaining of Poland is now completely absorbed into Russia. Okay, now, in Greece, after 400 years, Christian Greeks are going to revolt against the Turkish rulers with support from European intellectuals. A lot of these people are trying to keep the Muslim faith out of Europe, and as a result of the effort of all of these men, by the way, Lord Byron was not one of them. He was DOA, or dead on arrival. An independent Greek state was created, though, after the efforts of several other people. Yay! Now, in Britain, you have the Reform Act of 1832, and this is going to double the number of male voters, but you still had to own property in order to vote. But, so this keeps most of the poor away from being able to vote, but it does increase the number of people that could actually vote. So, in name, they are moving closer to a democracy, but you had far more rights in the United States than you did in Great Britain. In 1833, slavery was abolished in the British Empire. It was started about 25 years earlier, whenever it was abolished in Britain itself, and then it goes to the rest of the empire 25 years later. This will be why Britain will not help the Confederacy during the Civil War. Now, Britain also will pass the Poor Law Act of 1834. Okay? So jobless poor people are going to live in government workhouses and government-owned land. And the workhouses were so bad they were more unpleasant than any type of job that you would have. 200,000 people are going to be rounded up to work in the government workhouses. By the way, it was legal to beg, but you had to have a good reason for it. So, you had to have some type of physical ailment, blindness, your legs were lame, paralyzed, severe cases of polio. That would keep you from working, and that would allow you to beg. Also, if you were a widow, that would allow you to beg as well. If you were someone that had a baby, without being married, then you weren't on that list. So, we talked about this before. The British Revolution in 1830, 1831 is going to repeal the Corn Law, and this is going to keep a full century of free trade for people in England. The Mines Act is going to be an attempt to ban women and children from working in mines. And then the 10 Hours Act is also going to target children 13 to 18. So you could not work in textile mills for more than 10 hours a day. And this may not sound like much, but before this law was put into place, you were looking at children working for, 16 to 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, from about the age of 6. So this is going to improve the lives of everyone tremendously. Okay, now we look at the revolutions of 1848 to 1849. And if you look there on the map, you're going to see an explosion in several different places. And those little explosions are places where people were revolting. In fact, in the United States, you have the same thing going on in 1848. And this is at the end of the Mexican War, whenever all this land is added. And what's going to happen to it? Is it going to become slave states or free states? Well, that's the big debate. And at this point, no one really knows how everything's going to end. So we have a better idea in Europe. Okay, so the 1848 revolutions, what do they have in common? Well, one, liberals were frustrated at the lack of political change. They thought that democracy and the right to vote should be extended to everyone, not just the elite. Okay? A lot of the nationalists are going to hate the 1815 settlement in Vienna that was against self-determination for ethnic minorities. So in countries like Austria, whenever there were 20 to 30 different types of people, they would never have their own country, and they would always have to live on someone else's land. And if nothing else, the 19th century was about creating homes for everyone. 3, the lives of the working class suffered from poor agricultural productivity. So a lot of the working class are going to be working in factories and on the brink of starvation. In fact, during this time, there were a lot of people buying food from the United States. Okay, so France. France is really slow to add any type of suffrage and reform. So, again, the number of people that can vote there is very small, and they didn't want to create any changes. Instead, there's much more of a pushback towards a monarchy and a society led by the clergy and by the nobility. Okay, so basically all the things that led to the French Revolution. Okay, and here on earlier I talked about how you could draw Louis Philippe by using a pear. Well, on the left hand side there is kind of how people drew him and how people thought of him. And pear also in France at the time had the meaning of a fool. So if you go back to France and someone calls you a pear, you need to be like, hey, wait a minute, that's offensive. And there's no bullying. Although before the 21st century, if you said no bullying, then you would probably be bullied more. So be careful with time travel, everyone. Louis Blanc was a socialist who pushed for national workshop. And this is going to end as poor relief and not worker control of the industry. And the thought was eventually what would happen is this would lead to a communist society or a socialist society where the government or society owned all the major industries and controlled the supply and everything being done with the money from that. Okay, so in France, the June days, a lot of radical Republicans are going to fight the army, and 10,000 people die. They don't want the same type of leadership that they had, so the people get together and they elect Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, Louis Napoleon, and this will be the second president of the Second Republic. I'm sorry, will be the president under the Second Republic, under moderate and radical Republicans. And so even though he's been elected to a republic, Louis Napoleon is going to establish authoritarian control. So he basically sets himself up as a dictator. He will rule as a president. I believe at one point he also crowns himself king, and he also is an emperor. So it's really hard to hold all those different titles and stay modest, which he never does. In Prussia, okay, the liberals push for a Prussian assembly under Frederick William IV. Okay, so we've talked about several other Frederick Williams. This is the fourth one here. And basically, the people wanted to have a king in Prussia as well, and so the people get together and they offer him a crown to be the king of Prussia. But he said he would not take or accept a crown from the gutter. Okay, and he might accept it from the, from all the states if they got together to give it to him, but not from the people themselves. Okay, he grants a conservative constitution in 1850. Okay, so he's kind of pushing towards maintaining a lot of things, but expanding a few of the rights. And he didn't do it on his own. He does it because of a lot of riots that are taking place in Berlin. Okay, and so a lot of delegates are going to get together at that time and meet to talk about a united Germany and decide whether or not Austria should be part of this great new empire for the German people. They end up staying separate. And also at this time you have the issue of the Declaration of Rights for the German people. Again, not a lot of protection for the poor, though. In Austria, workers and students will rebel in March in 1848 in Vienna. And this is going to force Metternich to flee to Britain. Franz Joseph is going to become the emperor, and by the way, he will be emperor through the rest of the century and into the middle of World War One. It's the killing of his heir, his nephew, who's going to take the throne, that actually is the light to the powder keg that is World War One. And he agreed to a constitution in 1849. He really tries to centralize power. Again, he will crown himself the Kaiser Franz Joseph, which is from Caesar, and Tsar, which means emperor. So he saw himself much more as an emperor than he did as a king or especially as a president. But during this time, serfdom is abolished, and the army is used to stop any type of opposition of any kind. Okay, ethnicities are going to be the main reason, though, that there's a World War One. So several times, many of the different national groups or ethnic groups within Austria-Hungary will fight to become their own country and their own people, and all of these will fail horribly. Prague. Okay, a bunch of Slavic nationalists are going to get together in Prague to talk about unification as well. Again, this is a lot of what happens in 1848 is attempts at unifications. Okay, General Windisch Gratz is going to be one of the leaders there. Prince Alfred I is going to disperse the Prague Assembly. Okay, and the Austrian Prince Franz Joseph is going to promise Bohemian autonomy. Okay, so this is before he is crowned. So I probably should have put this before the last slide, but we're gonna do what we're gonna do, and eventually he's not going to do anything for that, and the Bohemian area is actually going to become Hungary, and he'll give them enough rights to make the country Austria-Hungary have two different congresses that are all under his reign, and he's also going to break up the Pan-Slav Congress to unite all the Slavs together into one nation. And that's still going to be some problems that we have in the 1980s and 1990s as well. So don't think all of this is going to go away. In Budapest, so back to Hungary, okay? Paris is going to inspire what's called the Hungarian Diet, and they're going to proclaim liberty for all of the Magyars or Hungarians. Louis Kossuth is a Hungarian liberal and nationalist who really fights for the Magyar cause. And in 1848, they write a constitution that promotes the Magyar language and took away the rights of all the Slavs. Okay, if you want to pick on people in Europe and you're another nation, pick on the Slavs and pick on Poland, because no one really cares other than the Slavs and the Polish. Okay. So the Slavic minority rights are all rejected by Franz Joseph, and he calls on Nicholas I to crush the nationalist movement. The Magyars are going to continue to push, however, for their own rights. Okay, in Italy, Italy's made up of about 6 different city-states. Okay. Charles Alpert of Piedmont, Sardinia, he's trying to start a war with Austria for more land. Austria owns a lot of land in northern Italy. So Austria, in response to this push by Charles Albert of Piedmont, Sardinia, he abolishes serfdom to try and get the peasants to help. And they do, and they're able to crush Albert's army. Okay. Now, Pope Pius IX, he was someone who's really pushing for reform and change, but he ends up turning against modernism. Okay. He's eventually expelled from Rome. Okay, and Mazzini is going to declare a Roman Republic. Louis Napoleon, however, is going to put Pius IX back on the throne to try and get some Catholic support in France. And the real guy who's the one who unites all of Italy together, even though he's not going to get all the credit that he probably deserves, is Giuseppe Garibaldi. Okay, and he will help eventually establish a Roman Republic, and later on they will have a king as well, and a lot of that's going to go to his efforts. Okay, one of the things we haven't talked about is really for the majority of history, there's been no type of police force. Okay, the French were some of the first people to create a police force, and their men were called sergents. Okay, and the sergents wore blue uniforms. They had a cane at day and a saber at night. These are really much smaller forces. Okay, and their main job was to just keep the peace. Now, many of you have probably heard of the British policemen. They're actually called bobbies, and they're all named for a man by the name of Robert Peel, and he was the guy who introduced the legislation to create them. And their main job was to keep the peace and clean up the drunks. Don't let the drunks, run amok throughout all the cities. Get them to stop. Okay. Now, Germany. I know everyone's going to think, you know what? I bet they're going to have something really peaceful. Okay. So in Germany they have what's called the Schutzmannschaft. Okay, and they're really treated more as a military force than a group of peacekeepers. Each member would carry a sword, a pistol, and brass knuckles. So you did not want to do anything to make the German Schutzmannschaft angry, because you only had one chance to make the Schutzmannschaft angry, and once you did, you would regret it for the rest of your life. Okay, so Britain also is going to try and reform their prisons at this time. And they're going to model their prisons after Walnut State Prison in Philadelphia. And this is one of the first times you really have prisons with individual cells. Before this, you have a lot of really large open areas, and you know, people lived in squalor who were in prison. This creates something I guess you can say. I guess this is better than what they had before. In France, they had the Petit Roquet, and this is where prisoners exercised while wearing leather masks as punishment. And they were also put in solitary confinement for large periods of time to try and examine their conscience. This is not as popular as it sounds. This is going to bring us to the end of the day. I hope most of you are still awake and still at least quasi happy. I hope everyone has a great day today, and please don't cocaine, please don't AIDS, and please don't COVID. Okay? Let's just stay safe, people. I'll see you on the other side, and have a great day. Don't go out. Okay? At least until whenever I find my mouse.